Michael Franzese is probably the most famous former mobster as of the time of this video. Only Sammy Gravano can rival him in this regard. Michael writes books, gives lectures, runs his own YouTube channel, and appears on dozens of others to give interviews or his expert opinion on the mafia. He's told his story many times, but apart from his books, these are mostly isolated excerpts from his life, rather than the full picture. In this video, we decided to rectify that. We've compiled everything Michael has said and created a clear chronological account of his life. If you're interested in hearing it, then meet Michael Franzese on the other side of the law. Before you continue watching, I'd like to ask for your financial support of the channel. At the link in the description, you can find my store-branded merch with exclusive prints designed by me. If you have the opportunity and you like something, please buy it so you can help the channel to develop. Thank you in advance and enjoy your viewing. Michael Franzese was born on May 27, 1951. His father was John "Sonny" Franzese, a former underboss of the Colombo family, and his mother was Cristina Capobianco, a waitress who worked at a club in Manhattan. Sonny Franzese was married to another woman at the time, who had 3 children with him, and Capobianco was his mistress. To avoid scandal, Capobianco married a man named Frank Grillo. But later, when Sonny divorced his first wife, Capobianco left Grillo and married Franzese. It was Sonny whom Michael considered his real father. But until he was 18, he went by the name Michael Grillo. Michael Franzese had a rich childhood. He lived in a luxurious house and had everything his heart desired, thanks to his father's efforts. Sonny did not want Michael to follow in his footsteps and get involved in crime. Michael attended an expensive school and even served as an altar boy at a local Catholic church for a time. He was so good at American football that the school team coach even predicted he'd have a distinguished career. Michael had only a vague idea of what his father did for a living. The subject was never discussed at home, and when the newspapers wrote about his father, his parents told Michael that it was all gossip. However, in the early 1960s, Sonny Franzese began to have serious problems with the law. The feds knew exactly who Sonny was. He was constantly on the police radar and was often arrested. But those arrests didn't lead to anything because either there was nothing serious to convict or the witnesses simply refused to talk. But in the early 1960s, the feds got serious about Sonny. He was placed under constant surveillance. Our video about Sonny details the tricks the feds had to resort to. Suffice it to say that the authorities bugged Franzese's house while it was still under construction, not to mention all the other surveillance. Sonny Franzese's true problems began with the 1965 arrest of robbers who were believed to be connected to either him or his men. They were facing a long prison sentence, so to get it reduced, they decided to turn in everyone they knew. Sonny was on that list. He was charged with the murder of Ernie "the Hawk" Rupolo. For a long time, Sonny's lawyers did everything they could to drag out the trial and delay his punishment, but in the spring of 1970, Father Franzese was finally sent to prison. Michael was studying medicine at Hofstra University, a very prestigious educational institution. Michael naively believed that if he became a doctor, he would be able to earn enough money to get his father out of prison, but he was not destined to finish his studies. Soon, he too would become involved in organized crime. It all began in the early 1970s. At the time, the son of Joe Colombo, the boss of the family which Sonny belonged to, was arrested. Joe responded by organizing a picket line directly in front of the FBI office. Colombo believed that his son was getting tried not because he was a criminal, but because he was Italian. This eventually led him to found the Italian-American Civil Rights League, which was supposed to protect local Italians from legal abuse by the authorities. In October 1970, 19-year-old Michael Franzese joined the league. The freshman, waving a poster during rallies, attracted a lot of attention from journalists, so Joe Colombo decided to make Michael his press officer. Michael began talking to journalists and giving interviews. In essence, Michael became the poster boy for the Italian-American Civil Rights League. The police did not always treat the picketers peacefully. Once, Michael even got into a fight with a cop, after which he was taken to the police station. The young Franzese could easily have been sent to jail, but his family came to his aid. His mother saw her son being dragged away by the police and told Joe Colombo, who immediately sent a good lawyer to the police station. Within a few hours, Michael was released, and instead of a prison sentence, he got off with a $250 fine. It was then that Michael met his benefactor, Joe Colombo, face to face for the first time. He praised Michael for his courage and told him he could consider himself part of the family. Michael himself did not take the Italian-American League seriously. He joined it solely to help his father, but there was little progress in the case. However, Joe Colombo didn't help the league much either. Quite the contrary. At one of the rallies, he was seriously injured and became practically a vegetable. We've already talked about this in more detail in our videos about Carlo Gambino and the Gallo brothers. Immediately after the attempt on Colombo's life, Michael Franzese dropped out of college. He calculated that it would be at least 10 years before he became a doctor, so instead of hitting the books, Michael decided to open his own auto repair shop in Brooklyn. Some sources report that Michael had no intention of going into a legitimate business. They believed that he had already become a partner of the Colombo family and opened the repair shop as a front. Either way, according to the official version, Franzese bought damaged cars, repaired them, and sold them. After dropping out of college, Michael opened 4 successful businesses in 1 year, which brought him a monthly income of $5,000. Whether it was his persistence and hard work or his connections to the Colombos that helped him reach such heights is up to each individual to decide. Business was going so well that Michael decided to expand. In the fall of 1973, one of his friends introduced Franzese to a banker who could help him get a loan, but in return asked for a favor: to buy a mink coat from him, which Michael did. Michael was going to give this coat to his mother as a gift, but the mechanic who worked for him had other plans: to steal the coat and sell it. Michael ordered him to return the coat as insurance took his car, a Chevrolet Camaro. The next day, the mechanic called Michael's home and said he couldn't find the coat, but he needed his car. Michael refused to return it. A few days later, Michael was arrested. He was charged with conspiracy, grand larceny, and 2 counts of possession of stolen property, all because of 1 car. Taken together, these charges could have resulted in up to 10 years in prison. The incident was even reported in the newspapers. Gangster's son follows in his father's footsteps, and so on. On top of that, the police became interested in Michael's business partners. One of them, for example, was Tony Morano, who was also doing business with the Colombo family. Michael was released on bail, but was arrested again just a week later. This time he was charged with racketeering. Morano, being an avid gambler, sold a car that belonged to local gangsters, the Chubby brothers, John Big Chubby Verastro and Robert Little Chubby Verastro, and kept the money for himself. The Chubby brothers came to the office to collect the debt when Michael was there. He tried to reconcile all sides, but just as the conflict seemed to be resolved, the police burst into the office. It turned out that the police had used Morano to get closer to Franzese and accuse him of organizing a criminal gang. At least, that was how Michael himself described the incident. In the end, Franzese was acquitted on both counts, but had to spend all his savings on the trials, and his business took a blow. Franzese's friends came to his aid. Vinny Vingo, whom Michael knew from the Italian-American League, owned a market. He offered Michael a job as a manager at the market. Franzese accepted the offer and within a few months, managed to get his business back on track. It turned out that many vendors were willing to pay extra to reserve their spots. Michael charged them between $20 and $100 and split the money with Vinny. Michael then began lending money to the same vendors at interest. What Michael was doing was good old-fashioned loan sharking, one of the mafia's main sources of income, but Franzese himself preferred to call his earnings providing investment capital for small businesses. However, the police soon became interested in this investment capital, and Michael had to look for other ways to make money. Thanks to the savings he had earned on the market, Franzese acquired the Hempstead dealership, then sold it and invested all the money in a Mazda dealership. According to Franzese, he managed to earn a lot of money solely through his hard work and patience. He vehemently denies any help from organized crime, which he believes only got in the way. Nevertheless, in 1975, Michael decided to follow in his father's footsteps and become a member of the family. The person who vouched for him, that is, offered to take him into the family, was Jojo Vitaco, a longtime friend of Michael's father, Sonny. Michael himself believes that he was lucky to get into the family so easily. And no, it didn't have to do with his father, as you might think. The Mafia was experiencing a personnel shortage in those years. From 1955 to 1972, the books were closed, and virtually no one was accepted into the family. This led to a situation in the early 70s where, due to deaths and prison sentences, the ranks of the Mafia were depleted and it had to start recruiting new members. For a year, Michael says he went on probation. To be honest, I don't know what that is, and I've never heard of it before in Mafia context. You can decide for yourself whether to believe Franzese or not. At the time, he was an errand boy for the acting boss of the family, Thomas DeBella. He was his driver and did other odd jobs. One of these errands led to a funny episode. Together with a business partner, Michael opened a butcher shop called Sonny's Farm, named after his father, of course. One of the meat suppliers for the shop was Peter Castellano, a relative of Paul Castellano, the boss of the Gambino family. One day, Peter sent a whole batch of spoiled chicken meat to Franzese's shop. Franzese contacted Peter and asked him to write off the cost of the spoiled goods. However, Peter refused to do so, explaining that the goods had been sent to the shop in perfect condition. The phone call ended with mutual recriminations and even insults. Since Michael was not yet a member of the family at the time, such provocative behavior towards a relative of the boss could have ended badly for him. Michael told Anthony Russo, a member of the family, about what had happened, and Russo told the boss of the family. As a result, the spoiled chickens became the reason for a meeting between the two bosses, Castellano and DeBella, at which it was decided that Peter would write off the cost of the chickens and Franzese would continue to buy meat from him. Franzese was accepted into the family in October 1975 and joined Andy Russo's crew. Also, shortly before joining the Mafia in June 1975, Michael Franzese married a girl named Maria. Michael quickly realized how great it was to be a member of the family. Thanks to his new status, he was able to obtain a favorable loan to expand his dealership, and also founded a truck container repair company. It's worth noting that Franzese constantly emphasizes that he was practically uninvolved in any illegal activities, extortion, or even more so, murder. He explains this by saying that since he was a good businessman, no one asked him to rob houses or break into safes. In 1978, Sonny Franzese was released on parole. One of the conditions of his release was that he had to find official employment. Michael got his father a job as a manager at his Mazda Lynn Imports dealership in Hempstead. It was a legitimate enough business to satisfy his parole officer. Sonny's office was across the street from the dealership. Also, with the consent of the family bosses, Michael left Andy Russo's crew and joined his father's crew. The Colombo family was going through changes at the time. In 1977, Thomas DeBella stepped down as boss, and in 1978, Joe Colombo died from injuries he had sustained in a shooting. Carmine Persico became the new boss of the family. Significant changes in Michael's life occurred in 1981. A member of the Colombo family, Sebastian "Buddy" Lombardo, came to Sonny Franzese with a problem. The problem was that Buddy's partner Lawrence Ioriso was being shaken down by a local gang that wanted to take over his company, Vantage Petroleum. The company was in the wholesale gasoline business. Sonny introduced Buddy to Michael, who got rid of the extortionists. Then, according to Michael Franzese himself, Ioriso, wanting to repay him, told him how to make hundreds of millions of dollars in illegal profits from gasoline fraud. You can learn more about gasoline scams by watching our video about the Russian mafia in the US. The essence of the scam was as follows. Until the early 80s, gas stations had to pay taxes on gasoline sales themselves. In those days, every gallon of gasoline sold brought 28 cents to the treasury, which gas station owners usually included in the price. Turkish and Greek immigrants began to take advantage of this scheme. They opened gas stations, sold as much gasoline as possible, and then, when it was time to pay taxes, they simply disappeared. One such swindler could earn around 500 to 600 grand. State authorities shifted the tax burden from gas stations to the distributors who sold gasoline to them. The idea was that the distributors would sell gasoline to gas stations with the tax already included, but in practice, this measure not only failed to defeat fraud, but actually increased its scale. Fraudsters began to set up dozens of fake distribution companies, and it was very difficult to find out who the end buyer was. No one ever started paying taxes. As for Ioriso, he further complicated matters by registering all his companies in Panama. The fact is that under Panamanian law, the owner of a company was considered to be the person who owned a controlling stake, and so Ioriso appointed frontmen as the official owners of the gas stations. Michael made a deal with Ioriso, under which 20% of the profits went to the Colombo family and the rest was divided equally between them. Ioriso took care of setting up the front companies, while Michael provided muscle. To start with, a new company called Galleon Holdings was opened in Panama. Vantage, a company that previously had been involved with Ioriso, supplied Galleon Holdings with gasoline, which it then distributed to gas stations. Michael also made sure that his people were among the managers and tenants of the gas stations. According to another version, Michael got involved in the gasoline business in a different way. His partner was approached by Russians asking for help in collecting debt of $70,000. Franzese became interested and decided to find out who these Russians were. They were immigrants from the USSR and Romania, Michael Markowitz and David Bogatin and Lev Persits, who owned a wholesale petroleum products company. At a meeting with them, Michael learned that they were using almost the same scheme as Ioriso. But they had problems. They lacked security forces who could resolve security issues and connections that would allow them to resolve problems with the authorities. The Colombos would resolve all these issues. In the end, an agreement was reached whereby the mafia would receive about 75% and the Russians 25%. In the 1980s, the gasoline scam essentially became the largest business involving organized crime. It was less risky than drug trafficking and brought in almost as much profit. The business was so good that over time, Franzese and Irizzo expanded to Connecticut and New Jersey, and even began to eye Florida. Every week, Franzese received several $1 million in cash from his Russian partners. Michael and Irizzo made $2 million a week, and in some weeks, even $4 million. Michael Franzese became one of the main moneymakers in the Colombo family. In addition to the gasoline scam, Michael had other business interests. He loved movies, and in 1983 decided to get into film production. He entered the movie business thanks to his father's friend, Jerome Zimmerman. Almost all the films Franzese produced were box office flops, so he decided to change tactics. Michael bought the rights to a finished B-movie by a little-known European director. The film was renamed, re-edited, and then resold. Franzese said that you could buy a film for $70,000 and then, after all the shenanigans described above, sell it for $350,000. But the whole thing seems more like a money laundering scheme than a real way to make money. Franzese was also co-owner of a sports agency that signed contracts with young athletes. In this business, Michael worked with Norby Walters. Over the course of 3 years, the agency signed contracts with 43 athletes, many of whom were professional football players from the NFL, or National Football League, the largest in the United States. Walters began courting talented players while they were still in college. Young athletes from humble backgrounds often signed contracts without consulting anyone or having a lawyer present. The law prohibited signing contracts with them until they reached the age of 18, but that didn't stop Walters. He sponsored young players who, after signing a contract with him, had to pay him a percentage of their earnings after signing with a professional team. This percentage was much higher than the amount the player received from Walters. If any of the players wanted to break the contract, Michael would step in and convince the player not to do so. Another interesting fact about the business world is that Franzese was associated with Al Sharpton, one of the most controversial American politicians in the second half of the 20th century. Al Sharpton is a black preacher and civil rights activist who was even nominated as the Democratic Party's candidate for president in 2004. He's often called a demagogue and even a black racist, but everyone agrees that it's better to be friends with him than enemies. Michael Franzese and Al Sharpton were introduced by the Rifkind brothers, owners of Spring Records, a rhythm and blues record label. They met in the early 80s, when Sharpton was in dire need of money. At the time, the Colombo family controlled the Private Security Guards Union, which was headed by a family partner, Daniel Cunningham. In 1983, the family decided to establish a branch of the union in Atlantic City, where a construction boom was underway, following the legalization of gambling. Atlantic City was then considered a fiefdom of the Philadelphia Mafia. Michael Franzese met with the bosses of the Philadelphia family, Nicky Scarfo, who agreed to allow the union to open. Scarfo also warned Michael that the local hotel owners were incredibly stubborn, and that in order to get them to agree to cooperate with the union, he would have to organize picket lines at almost every hotel. Michael contacted Al Sharpton, who said that for a good price he could arrange 10 buses with the most vicious picketers who would ruin the life of any hotel manager. Equally interesting is the story of Franzese's connections with boxing promoter Don King. According to him, in 1983, the FBI tried to put King behind bars for his alleged ties to the mafia. To do this, they enlisted FBI agent Victor Guerrero, who, under the alias of Victor Quintana, posed as a wealthy South American looking to get into the promotion business. Guerrero managed to get in touch with Sonny Franzese, who advised him to contact Michael to help him get in touch with King. As a result, the young Franzese met with Guerrero more than 50 times. The FBI agent feigned genuine interest and demonstrated a desire to do business with Michael in every area, from car sales to movies. Franzese agreed to arrange a meeting between Guerrero and King, but only after seeing a check for $15 million, the amount needed to organize a major boxing match. He was shown the check, and Guerrero eventually met with King. But the fight never happened because Guerrero couldn't come up with the initial capital of several $100,000. King was subsequently charged with tax evasion, but the case was dismissed in court as the grand jury found King not guilty. The prosecution used audio recordings of conversations between Michael and Guerrero in the case, but there was nothing illegal on them. Franzese made no secret of his wealth and lived a lavish lifestyle, denying himself nothing. He owned a private jet, a helicopter, several luxury cars, and an apartment in Delray Beach, Florida, where he moored his motorboat and 12-meter yacht. This attracted the attention of journalists. In 1986, Fortune magazine ranked Michael 18th on the list of the 50 richest and most influential mobsters, and he was often referred to in the press as a yuppie don. Yuppie was the term used in the 80s to describe young playboys who earned huge amounts of money and led modern, energetic lifestyles. While hippies burned their lives away and suffered from idleness, yuppies, on the contrary, sought to earn all the money in the world. Franzese felt like a rock star. Like John Gotti, he never denied himself the pleasure of giving interviews or showing off in front of the camera. He behaved provocatively. For example, in one interview, he said that he had no connection to organized crime, and if the FBI thought otherwise, let them prove it. Because of this, Carmine Persico and many other members of Michael's Colombo family did not like him very much. But as long as he brought in a lot of money, they turned a blind eye to his behavior. Persico also made Franzese the capo of the family. Michael himself mentioned in his memoirs that he had to manage nearly 300 people. But his lavish lifestyle and outrageous interviews began to attract the attention of the authorities. Organized crime investigators set up an oil industry task force and began an investigation. And in the spring of 1984, Iarrizzo was tried on charges related to the activities of Vantage Petroleum. He was found guilty of grand larceny, tax evasion, and mail fraud. The sentencing was set for July. Iarrizzo did not want to go to prison, so he fled while out on bail and left for Panama, where he had his own estate. Franzese tried to convince Larry that he should stay and fight for his freedom, file another appeal, but on the eve of the final hearing, he left the U.S. Larry believed that he could manage his affairs from Panama, but that only lasted a few months. Iarrizzo went to Austria, where he planned to pull off the same gasoline scam he had in the United States, as well as marry off his daughter. A chartered jet was supposed to fly several hundred guests across the ocean. When the feds found out, they made a deal with the Panamanian government. Panamanian security forces arrested Iarrizzo and sent him to prison, from where he was pulled out 3 days later by FBI agents. He was taken to Miami, where he was locked up with hardened criminals. A few months later, Iarrizzo began cooperating with the investigation. According to him, Michael Franzese forced him to leave for Panama and even tried to kill his son. Franzese's other partners in the gasoline scam also began to have problems with the law. At the end of 1984, Michael Markowitz was charged with tax evasion. Franzese wasn't too worried, thinking the feds didn't have anything on him. Plus, there was more important news for the Franzese family. Sonny got out on parole in June 1984 after serving his latest sentence. In January 1985, Michael Franzese met 20-year-old actress and dancer Camille Garcia while filming in Florida. He immediately divorced his wife and married Camille in Las Vegas in July 1985. In November, they had a son, who they named Michael. However, in December 1985, Franzese was charged with tax evasion. It was estimated that he had concealed approximately $40 million from the IRS. He was also accused of extortion and a number of other crimes. He managed to get out on bail. In addition to his problems with the law, Michael also had issues with his family bosses. Rumors began to circulate that Michael was hiding some of the money from the gas station scam. It got to the point where Michael and Sonny were called to a meeting with the family leadership so that they could explain the situation separately. Michael managed to convince the bosses that he had not hidden anything from them. With the help of his lawyers, Michael managed to fight off 5 charges of various crimes, from usury to extortion. It seems that the feds really had nothing on him. But soon, Iarrizzo made a deal with the investigation and testified against Michael, among others. In March 1986, Franzese pleaded guilty to racketeering and conspiracy to evade taxes. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison and fined $14.7 million. It was a pretty good deal for him, as all the charges against him were dropped. It was then that Michael began working for Edward McDonald, one of the leaders of the organized crime task force. McDonald recognized Franzese's potential. Unlike the typical wise guy who had never left Brooklyn, Michael represented the family at important meetings across the country. He knew bosses from many cities in the U.S. During their collaboration, Michael provided information about many people close to the Colombo family, but he did not testify against them. In March 1987, Norby Walters filed a lawsuit against several of the former clients for breach of contract. It was a ridiculous move. Essentially, Walters was demanding the return of money that he himself had paid to the players illegally. Franzese even compared the lawsuit to a robbed drug dealer calling the police. When the lawsuit became known to the authorities, a scandal erupted. Sports reporters dubbed it Jockgate, and Walters became a symbol of the corruption that permeated college sports. Franzese testified against Walters. Later, Michael insisted that the only person he had turned on was Walters, and that it didn't matter because Walters was not a member of the family. Thus, he had not testified against his colleagues. In fact, Michael was lucky. The Organized Crime Task Force was disbanded around the same time, and he did not have to testify in any other cases. In essence, Michael simply did not have time to turn in the others. Franzese's lawyers also managed to set a time limit on his cooperation agreement with the feds, and he did not have to cooperate with any other investigators in the future. But even this was seen as betrayal from the family. Colombo family boss, Carmine Persico, wanted him dead. Persico was so angry that he would, quote, do anything to kill Michael Franzese. Informant Gregory Scarpa told FBI agents. Michael Franzese was not a member of the Witness Protection Program. When some journalists ask Michael if he's afraid of revenge from the mafia, he avoids answering. Perhaps the matter was somehow settled at the time. For example, there's a rumor that Sonny Franzese managed to convince Persico to let Michael live. In return, Michael gave the Colombo family the lion's share of the money he had left over from the gasoline scam. There's also a version according to which Michael was simply lucky. They say he survived only because in the early 1990s, the Colombos had more important things to do. Back then, the third war within the Colombo family had begun. Michael was released from prison in May 1989, having served only part of his 10-year sentence, and was given a 5-year suspended sentence. He moved to California with his wife. In December 1994, now completely free, Michael turned to charity work. He founded the Breaking Out Foundation, which warns young people about the temptations of a life of crime and helps those suffering from gambling addiction. Franzese often gives lectures at schools and colleges. At one point, he even coached a children's baseball team. In 1996, Michael appeared before a U.S. Senate committee investigating the activities of the Russian mafia. However, the authorities heard nothing new from Michael at that hearing. He talked about his schemes that were already known or described the activities of his partners who were no longer alive at that point. Michael Franzese now lives in California with his wife and is raising 3 children. It's unlikely that he has any money left from the gas station scam. He has to give lectures too often. Michael leads a middle-class lifestyle. He has written several books about his criminal past. Recently, Michael has also become a business consultant. A few years ago, a book entitled I'll Make You an Offer You Can't Refuse was published under his name, in which he shares his thoughts on the qualities a successful businessman and entrepreneur should possess. Franzese believes that no business plan is better than a bad business plan, advises patience, and quotes King Solomon and Machiavelli extensively. He has a YouTube channel where he reviews gangster movies, talks about prominent figures in organized crime, and, of course, reminisces about the good old days. However, Franzese does not idolize or admire his past. He much prefers going to church. According to Michael, his life changed after he let God into his heart. Even when Michael was in prison, reading the Bible helped him get through difficult days. Once he was free, the first thing he did was get baptized. He considers one of his best gifts to be a Bible signed by Pope John Paul II himself. In the inscription, the Pope praised the former capo of the Colombo family for his outstanding work on behalf of young people. His real father, Sonny Franzese, passed away in 2020. Michael did not attend his funeral. Sometimes it seems that Michael is distancing himself too conspicuously from his past. Others believe that Franzese, on the contrary, overexploits it to make a living. And while Sonny Franzese is considered one of the most endearing members of the mafia in history, Michael is unlikely to receive such praise.